Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to HAC TV. Josh, how you feeling, man?
I'm well. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here every weekend with you guys sharing information.
Great, great, great. So we're gonna have a really fun and dope program today. We're talking about civic engagement in the Haitian community. Josh, why is it important for people to be civically engaged?
Listen, as Haitian immigrants and people who are growing up in the United States, civic engagement is how you get resources, how you empower yourself. We are the oldest democracy in the world. And if you're not participating in that democracy, your community and yourself, you're losing out. So this is critically important. And I'm happy that Haitian American Caucus continues to put on this program.
Absolutely, man. I think that's great. That's wonderful. So, um, so you know what? Mental health, right? Really quickly before we bring everybody on, Josh, like, why is that important? And I know, I'm not the moderator and asking you questions, but I think it's good to before we get it going that we start having these questions, man. Like, why is it important? Like what has been your take around hearing mental health in the community?
Well, I'm not a doctor. All I know is my life experiences and my interactions with other people around mental health. Mental health is essentially the underlying basis for how we function during the day and interact with people. And it's something that's been stigmatized in our Black communities. And COVID has put a urgency on the need to destigmatize it, get people to understand what mental health is, and be able to seek wellness and mental health. If you don't have great mental health, you can't function at work, you can't function in family. You basically have this gray cloud hanging over you that keeps you from realizing your full potential. And we want to see people realize their full potential.
All right, wonderful. All right, so we're gonna bring in our guest. Just wanted to remind everybody that you are watching HAC TV. My name is Sam Pierre. I'm the executive director of the Haitian American Caucus. We are sponsored by PayPal and EEP Law. EEP Law is our legal sponsor for our show. So if anyone has any issues with personal injury or with criminal justice or discrimination at your job, know that you have support here with EEP Law. The information is on the bottom of the screen, www.eeplaw.com. They are here for us. You have representation. I think that's one of the most important things that people don't really understand is that you have representation as a member of HAC. Again, also feel free to go and join HAC, become a member. It's a free membership. All we ask is that we give us your time. Volunteerism is the price that you pay for your membership here at HAC. So www.hacglobal.org/join. And I'm really excited. So you know what? Let's get this show on the road. So first, I want to invite Shawn Henry, who is one of our good friends, man. We just wanted Shawn to come out here and introduce himself and let everybody know, what should they be expecting from Shawn today and around this conversation. Shawn.
All right. Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So this topic of COVID and mental health, I think it's a popular topic nowadays because we're all thinking about how we've been adjusting and not adjusting to this pandemic. But I am a LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, and also a certified mental health integrative medicine practitioner. And what that pretty much means is that I pay attention to holistic health. So not just medicine or not just therapy, but a combination of mental health, physical health, spiritual health, the whole gamut, right? And how that plays a part in how well we become or how well we remain. So that's what I'm bringing today, just to kind of give perhaps additional resources in terms of how we can maintain our wellness, improve our wellness, and how we can do that without necessarily drugging ourselves with medications or alcohol or food, right? So I'm glad to be here.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Shawn, I'm glad you said that because there's a lot of people everybody in my friend circle has been talking about the universe a lot lately versus God. So I know that's a really a hot topic. So I can't wait. So maybe we could dig into that. It's all the same, but we got some viewers who are like, So that spiritual wellness is important as well.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you touched on that. All right, so let's bring in Maya Bass. Maya, welcome to HAC TV. How are you?
I'm doing great. I feel very happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Introduce yourself. Let our viewers know about Maya.
Sure. So my name is Maya Bass, LMSW, and I have a strong background in education. So regarding the topic today, like Mr. Shawn said, is a very popular topic, mental health in the season of COVID. And I have a background in education as well as performing arts. So my contribution to the conversation will be regarding expression in terms of how people are dealing with the COVID and their time and how it's affecting their mental health. And also, as Mr. Pierre Joshua said earlier, the stigmatization. I'm seeing that it's becoming a little less stigmatized amongst the youth. It went from being a joke and something that people made fun of to now a lot of my youth and students are like actively seeking counseling and therapy, which is a really, really interesting perspective. So that's pretty much where my lane is.
Wonderful. That is phenomenal. All right. And last but not least, let's bring on the bishop himself, Sony Pierre. Sony Pierre, come on in, man.
How are you guys doing? Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Hack, for having me. Good morning, Josh. Good morning, Shawn. Good morning, Maya. It is definitely a pleasure and an honor to be with you guys on this day, but also tackling mental health. I am, as you can see on the screen, the founder and CEO of ARA Emotional Wellness Mental Hygiene, and we are a private practice right here in the South side of Brooklyn that is, tackling the I can say the war on mental health and emotional wellness. We have a saying here that mental health is not just a thing, but it's everything. And just as Joshua Josier mentioned earlier, if you're not functioning mentally on a regular basis, it impacts everything that you do. Yeah. And I think sometimes we tend to negate how we're feeling, in particularly within our community. We kind of put it on the back shelf, and then we look to take care of it later on. And we don't realize how much our mental health, as well as our emotional health, as well as our spiritual health, actually affects those that are around us. So I hope that I will be able to share information that will be able to help those that are watching and those that probably see this later on. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. So Josh and I are going to take some turns asking some questions, and so that we can kind of get it going. Since I'm the baby cousin to Josh, I'll go first, right? So the first question I want to ask is, we know during COVID, people lost a lot of people. People's spirits were down. People just didn't see the upside. And I'm going to be honest, even now, everyone thought COVID was going to end in December 31st, 2020, COVID was done. And January 1st, 2021, we were good. So that didn't happen. And now we're going into March. So what can we do in terms of optimism, right? Because I know that optimism is a part of someone's, waking up, tomorrow's going to be a better day, we'll feel better. Like what are some tools or recommendations that you can give to someone who just isn't feeling optimistic about anything at all?
Well, I guess I'll start. I think patience. Patience is a huge one. I think we do not take the time to allow things to happen, and we tend to try to take control over things that we may not have control. And oftentimes things happen as they should, And we're in unprecedented times. We're in a pandemic that we've never experienced before. So really just allowing things to be and taking notice and recognizing that you may not have immediate control over what's happening right now. So, taking the time to breathe, and also not oversaturating yourself with media. I think, what a lot of people have been caught up with is watching the news cycle around the clock, social media, and we're just inundating ourselves with so much information and we're just getting frazzled. So just having patience.
Wonderful.
So Maya, would you please give us what your definition of mental health is?
Oh, my definition. Oh man. Well, health in general to me is just wellness and a sense of homeostasis. So regarding mental health, I guess my definition would be just being at a place of stability, being well balanced, and just considering yourself to be well. And who was it? I was you, Josh. You mentioned being able to function. I think that determines the difference between someone who is struggling with their mental health and someone who isn't, the ability to function, in terms of the day-to-day.
Yeah.
So that would be my definition.
Now, we understand that mental health was an issue in our Black communities before the pandemic.
Oh, yes.
And, it has been exacerbated. Pastor Sony, prior to the current pandemic, what was the mental health situation looking like in Brooklyn and in our Black communities in general?
Well, when we talk about pre-COVID mental health, we need to focus on some of the things that impact our community that cause levels of mental health. So when it comes down to the Black community, we have to consider low-income families. Mm-hmm. That's something that brings on mental health. You have crime, that's something that brings on mental health. You have poverty amongst individuals. Then you have education. Believe it or not, some of the things, and I'll give this as an example. When I first opened up my practice, one of the things that I was kind of marketing myself to some of the schools here in the Brooklyn area. And one of the things that I noticed that when you would go into certain schools that had more Caucasian students as opposed to African-American students, you would find that you wouldn't be greeted with metal detectors and school security. You would find someone that was in plain clothing. And then when I would go down to the Bed-Stuy area, and then you would see, I would be greeted by security officers. I would be greeted by metal detectives. And these types of things trigger someone's mental state. I'm not being treated as a normal human being. As soon as I cross over to certain areas, I'm being treated as someone of question. Whether I was wearing a suit or a tie. Wow. So you could imagine the impact that our kids deal with on a regular basis. Every morning having to go through metal detectors, and this is pre-COVID, having to go through security officers. Those things change the mental state of an individual, because now, God forbid, one of those kids get arrested and they go to a correctional facility. The process is still the same. Wow. They're still going through metal detectors. So they've become they've become normalized to the certain systems that are in our community. Pre-COVID, especially with African Americans, or right when COVID did hit, I've met a couple of Caucasian counterparts that decided to fly to their home in Hawaii, fly to their home in Texas, fly to their home in a suburban area. But the fact of the matter is that we don't get to leave our community.
So, Pastor Sony, we're going to dig into the economics of that, and I'm going to come back to you. Maya, based on what Pastor Sony said in the first half, crime, education system, just day-to-day life of being Black, is just being Black a health stressor that is affecting our mental health?
Oh, absolutely. I am African American. It plays a huge part in mental health. Like he's saying, things that we experience, like myself being followed around in stores, because you're a thief or whatever. I mean, we're talking elementary school days. So now as an adult, it plays games on your psyche, because now as an adult, I'm expecting to be followed. Or now I'm going into stores and places and I'm making sure my hands are exposed so you can see I'm not stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I'm not a thief. I've never stolen. So it kind of, like he said earlier, you become normalized to feeling like you don't belong, or that you have a title of, the scary Black thug or the gangster thief or whatever the case may be. So it definitely plays a huge role on the mental health. And you feel feelings of insecurity, you feel feelings of intimidation, embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you're talking elementary school age, middle school, high school to college, and it's literally never ending. It just plays a huge role in the mental.
No. So, Shawn, we're looking at the racial aspect of it. How much of it is really about race, the fact that I'm Black or brown, and how much is it about economics? Because we also know that some of it is a function of where you live geographically, how much money you make, what access you have to certain things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think you can look at each individually. There's an intersection between race and economics. So, we're starting to hear a lot about social determinants of health right now in terms of access to COVID vaccines and the people getting medical care. So yeah, it's connected. We can't see each term separately. So unfortunately, in Black and brown communities, we have less access to certain services. And we may have less access to quality, services, right? And services meaning mental health care, medical care, foods, all of those things connect. So, what we should do is start to realize that medical care, health care, mental health care, food, surroundings, all those things do not necessarily have to be for the wealthy, right? If you are on, food stamps, why shouldn't you be able to get healthy foods, right? Should you have to go to a Whole Foods to spend X amount of dollars for certain things, right? So we need to make those things more accessible in our communities, and that's inclusive of I know in terms of professionals, we tend to feel that we may get better opportunities in certain communities because of the economic status of those communities, but realizing that there is a give back, and our communities, the lower SES communities, do deserve the same treatment.
Okay, so Shawn, now we're just talking about pre-pandemic,
right?
Black community, all these stressors that we face, etc. Plus, on top of that, getting treatment from mental health is stigmatized. Now, a year ago comes this pandemic, which leads to various types of stressors. Tell me, Shawn, what has been the impact of the pandemic? Is it PTSD? Is it just go with the flow? What are we looking at here?
I think what we're looking at is trauma, right? And we all experience trauma. It's not just specific to soldiers or to poor people. Everyone experiences trauma. I think what we need to focus on is how we're managing and supporting that trauma and that trauma experience. We're looking at people who have been in homes and not being able to be as mobile as they were pre-pandemic, right? So now we're looking at a lot more intimate partner violence in the homes, child abuse, all of those things that are starting to bubble up or have bubbled up because people don't have the outlets. Yes, we have the Zoom calls. Yes, we have the happy hours and the Facebook lives and all these things that are going on, but people are still dealing with themselves and dealing with whatever their immediate community is. And that might be the 40 by 40 apartment, right? So, we're in these contained spaces and we're being forced to deal with it. So yes, community, being able to communicate effectively, also realizing that we need to create some boundaries, and that may mean that you need an hour to kind of just be alone and breathe, right?
Yeah. Excellent. So, Pastor Sony, pandemic hits, and I'm sure there are different ways maybe the stressors and the mental health starts to manifest itself. You're underground, you're in the community in Flatlands, Canarsie, and other parts of Southern Brooklyn. What were some of the things that you saw from your community members and the people that you're serving with your nonprofit that started to show the symptoms, if you will, of the pandemic's impact on people's mental health?
Geographically, when you look at, as a matter of fact, what I'll do is I'll piggyback off of some of the things that Shawn was saying, particularly in the African American community or Black and Brown communities. When it comes down to mental health, when somebody's institutionalized, and this was a survey that was done, even treatment is different. Treatment is different. Someone that may have the same diagnosis and different color is usually treated different, simply because of that stigma of who people view us to be. So when we look at some of these issues, we have to consider, and I'm grateful for people like Shawn and Maya and other clinicians that are in this practice, because oftentimes certain clinicians aren't able to deal with certain types of demographics. But to also mention or answer the question that you said, when it comes down to the Canarsie or the South area of Brooklyn, we're a neighborhood that is surrounded by two major project areas, low-income housings. And then in the middle, you have suburbia. So you could imagine the stressors that take place in those areas pre-COVID. So you have robberies, you have shootings, you have rapes, you have all these different types of things, police activity. And then you drive down in the middle of us and you see, a beautiful plush grass homes. So you have these two different dynamics, or these two different ways of life, that when you see the neighbors, oftentimes there aren't barbecues being done at the front gate or the front lawn, versus when you hit those project areas, you have those dynamics. But at the end of the day, they're brown and Black individuals that are just serviced differently. So when we look at some of the things that we deal with around here, you see that there is some level of hostility, but at the same time too, you drive a couple of blocks down and then it's a very peaceful area.
But that's interesting, Maya, what Pastor just said, because what essentially he's saying is that there are two groups of people, same demographic in terms of race, but a different demographic in terms of income, but the proximity to other means that they're like, despite the fact they're in separate bubbles, they're actually bubble, and you have an overall community stress. Tell us about that and speak to that, if you will, for a second.
Sure. I mean, just to put it out there, gentrification has altered New York City greatly. Previously, before the pandemic, I mean, it's just a blatant and very obvious, like, I guess, reformed segregation, and almost like it's literally, you can cross the street and see two different economic statuses. It's insane. Like one town over, poverty and then money. It's completely insane. And as it relates to mental health, again, just having to be faced with that. It's one thing when you're leaving your community and dealing with these mental health stressors regarding race and economic stuff, but when you're home and you're facing it, it's a whole new ball game, right? I've heard endless stories of people trying to enter their own apartment building and being questioned, or trying to be being forced to show ID. That is traumatic, to say the least. It's pretty horrifying. And, so back to the conversation of COVID and mental health. I'm from Jamaica, Queens, Southside Jamaica, Queens. It's a pretty rough neighborhood. And the encounters that I've had, I think the number one issue out of all of the issues that I've heard of is depression. And it comes from, again, the history of the separation and the difference of races and economic status, on top of isolation, right? COVID has forced us to be isolated. Even when you're in public, you're still isolated, right? Because of that 6 feet social distancing. So even when I'm in public, I'm still by myself. And it's all of these layers, right? And I'm not saying that, Caucasian people or other people who are not, people of color are not struggling, but there is a very specific trauma that people of color are experiencing right now because of the previous issues layered on top of the current circumstances.
Now, you mentioned depression. Give it to me like I'm elementary school. What is depression, and how do I know the symptoms of depression?
Oh man, like you're in elementary school. Okay. Depression, you'll see signs of it. It can come in many forms. It can come in undereating, overeating, overuse of substances, a shift in your attitude, intentional isolation, purposely separating yourself from family or community. And in terms of dealing with it, that can come in many forms as well. I think that people often wait too late, and they get to a space where they're unable to function normally. And what I love about therapy is that you don't ever have to wait until you're on the edge. Like, you can start these interventions as soon as there's one little tiny hint, right? And it almost serves as like a precautionary measure, right? But of course, there's a stigma and things of that nature. But anyway, I'm glad that the discussion of mental health has become a little bit more common, because people don't know what depression looks like. And now we're seeing it in memes. We're seeing it on Instagram. We're seeing it on Facebook. We're seeing it in conversations. And people are like, maybe I'm experiencing some depression as well.
That's a good point. So, Shawn, how long can an individual be living or going through depression and not even be aware that it's depression? How long do they go on thinking this is just my life?
I think people can go lifetimes, unfortunately. I think, especially as people of color, we've somehow made these experiences as a badge of honor, right? So if I can go through these stressful situations, I'm stronger.
I'm strong.
And I'm a better person because of that.
Yep.
And we find it in eating, overeating, right? We find it in just flaring up with your family members, disciplining your children, right? there are people who are depressed and are abusing their children because of the depression. And they don't realize it. They just see it as, well, my parents did it to me, my grandparents, and it's just, this is what you're supposed to do because culturally it's responsible behavior, right? So it can be something that we live with and not even notice because we disguise it as being culturally appropriate.
Now, Shawn, there are two groups in our society that I am particularly sensitive about, and I consider them to be the two most vulnerable populations. One of them being seniors, because we all love our grandmas and our grandpas, but we love our grandmas, and we love our nieces and nephews and kids. How has the trauma of the pandemic affected the seniors, and how has that trauma affected kids and their schooling, Shawn?
So, we understand that we've been in this isolation, right? And, especially seniors who do not have family members who live with them. They're even experiencing more isolation, where in the past they would be able to go to the senior center. They were able to have family members come by and visit them. So they're dealing with that isolation even more. And also not even having access to a computer or being able to use a computer, right?
Right.
So we're experiencing that with that demographic. Now with children, they had outlets where they can go to school and they can run around. They can see other kids. They can, interact with other children and experience a different environment. I heard Pastor Sony earlier mention about environment, but we also have to factor in how someone's home and how school can be a respite, right? These kids were able to leave and go for 8 hours a day to a different environment. How therapeutic that was for them.
Yeah.
So now being forced to stay in a home that a lot of things are probably going on, and now you have to learn on top of that without a space that you can release. It compounds and can become a bigger issue. So that's something that we're going to end up having to deal with on the outset of this. How has this impacted our ability to interact with each other? Because we're all going to be somewhat affected by this, right? Are you going to be quick to hug someone or shake someone's hand?
No.
Now, you just touched on, again, you guys, just so you know, my background is in finance and economics. So anything that economically is touched upon, I got to dig into it.
Right.
You're saying that a key outlet for a lot of people was being able to go online, etc. What happens to a community that doesn't have access to technology and broadband when most people are saying, like, well, go on to Zoom or get your mental health checkup online? What happens to a community like ours? First you, Shawn, and then Pastor Sony.
Well, we have a disadvantage. I mean, those communities are disadvantaged. I know I work for the Veteran Affairs, and one initiative that they have enacted with veterans is the ability to bridge that digital divide, right? So there are veterans who are now able to get a tablet for free from the VA hospital. And this is to encourage virtual care because they're not able to go into the hospitals anymore because of the limitations, right? So being able to have to get a tablet from the VA hospital in order to connect with their providers and other resources.
Well, who's paying for these tablets?
Well, it's the government. So the VA is a federal agency, and it's partnerships, right? So this civic engagement is the huge thing about it is partnerships. So partnering with Apple, partnering with PayPal, right? And having these connections where you can say, hey, can you provide these resources for X amount of people?
Is it worthwhile? Because PayPal could say no. Is it worth to have our tax dollars used in such a manner to invest in technology for the elderly, the young, and the disabled?
I agree. I do think so. Yes, I think it's worthwhile. I also think it's worthwhile for generations to also connect in terms of we have these elderly who are not able to, who may not be familiar with these technologies. We, as the younger generation or the more experienced generation with these things, should also be kind of working with them to help them, because you'll realize that they are open to learning. We may say, oh, well, they're older, they don't want to know about iPad or no cell phone or whatever, but they actually want to. So it's just a matter of us connecting with them and helping them to navigate through that.
Pastor Sony, your thoughts?
I agree definitely with Shawn, but I also want to add that at the end of the day, one of the things that make us who we are is that we're social beings. Even the individuals that are not as social are social. We're used to being around people, even if we don't speak. We're used to having or feeling that presence around us. And because of COVID stripping us of that has caused or impacted our mental health. You do have seniors that refuse to go into the whole social media or the technology realm. They don't want to involve in it. So what ends up happening? What ends up happening to those individuals that don't look to engage in the social media? And as we mentioned earlier, they're not going to their senior centers. Sometimes they have to do their clinical appointments online. So that within itself impacts their mental state and cause them to be in a position where, it frustrates them. And physical care work hand in hand with mental care. So someone that's senior, that's dealing with frustration and anger, and that impacts if they're hypertensive. And so you could see the dynamics physically on how it impacts them. We have to try our best to see how we can try our best to impact those individuals that don't really want to associate with the social media. When we look at the first hit of a pandemic that hit this country in the 1800s with I believe it was the Spanish flu, there are pictures circulating where you get a chance to see that there were people walking around with face masks. There were people that were social distancing themselves. But you got to think, when it was back then, they didn't have YouTube, they didn't have Netflix, they didn't have internet. They had to deal. You had to read about how many people died from it. But yet and still, we were able to make it through it. And I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of emphasize and not allow the pandemic to rule our lives, but we will be able to climb over it.
So
You're muted.
we're in this now. The vaccines are coming down the pipeline. Eventually, God willing, the vast majority of people will be vaccinated. This whole pandemic thing will have been behind us. Are there any lingering effects? Do we all go back to normal and being happy again, or is there a different expectation here?
Was that addressed to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you and then Shawn.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You were muted at first. I think, Josh, you mentioned it earlier, that when there is some type of normalcy, will we go back to like hugging and high-fiving? I think there's definitely gonna be a little lingering and remnants of like the pandemic trauma. I think we're all going to be greatly affected. And don't get me wrong, because many of us are very excited to just go to a barbecue, Jesus. Like, Lord, I just want a burger or something in sunshine. So there will be some, don't get me wrong, there will be some excitement and some urgency to just have an outlet, but there will definitely be some remnants of just nervousness, probably a little fear. And I think that we could, as mental health professionals, just continue to encourage, interventions in therapy and holistic practices like Shawn, just because the pandemic ends and everybody gets their vaccine, doesn't mean that things won't be still lingering. We have to adjust, just like we had to adjust to this pandemic. We're going to have to adjust to the transition of going back.
Shawn?
Yeah, so I agree exactly what Maya said. There is going to be an adjustment to how we relate to each other and how we connect, right? Are we going to be hugging and touching and doing all of those things like we did before? Are we going to be more cautious about it? Are we going to utilize, it's funny because in terms of snow days, our snow days don't exist anymore. Are we just going to be expected to just work from home or go to school from home, right? I joke with friends and say, yeah, it's pre-pandemic snow days. That's how you'll be able to tell your age. But yeah, I think we're going to have to adjust like we've done in the past. And I think it's having faith in the fact that we can adjust. We are human beings. We are social beings. So we will make it through. And something else is going to happen X amount of years from now. And we just have to adjust that.
Okay, so we're destigmatizing this. What do we do going forward in terms of making sure that we get proper mental health, Shawn? And then I'd like to hear from you, Pastor Sony, on this as well.
I think part of the destigmatization is not making mental health a medical issue. I think, oftentimes we like to put these terms on things and say, oh, well, you're depressed and you're this and you're suffering from anxiety and we're medicalizing it so much that we don't realize that it's normal. I mean, yes, we have different degrees of experiences, but everyone is going through something on some level. So recognizing that, yeah, we can be responsible for taking care of ourselves, and it doesn't necessarily mean going on medications. It may just mean adjusting how you eat, right? I think as Caribbean people, we tend to eat a lot of foods that are heavy in carbohydrates, right? We eat the plantain, we eat the rice, we eat all of these things, and we don't realize how those things can affect our mental health and it affects our functioning. Right. So, being aware of that and being educated on how these little things, how the colors in your apartment or your home can adjust your mental health, how, your spirituality and how you view that, whether you acknowledge something large, bigger than you, whether that's God or Jah or whoever, but recognize that something bigger than you is important and having goals, right? And saying, yes, I want to get this degree and I'm going to go ahead and push forward through that, no matter if I'm stuck at home or not, right? So, yeah, I think taking away the stigma of feeling like it's something that a doctor has to cure and medication has to cure, and realizing that we can actually help to cure ourselves.
Yeah, so, Pastor, in our community, the vast majority of us are people of faith. That's the first place we go to when we're going to trying times. How do we balance faith and the need for mental health that is maybe professional? And is there any type of conflict there, or is there a way that they actually both work together, in your opinion?
I want to make sure I answer this not only spiritually or clinically, but also theologically. I think sometimes we may over spiritualize things. We often think that we can pray everything out, or even sing everything out, or even read certain things out. But oftentimes, if we read scripture, for those that do, you would see that mental health was an issue within scripture. Some may hate me when they say when I say that. Guess what? Jesus went through a depression state. He literally said in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, "Listen, I was sad unto death." So his depression or his sadness escalated into a depression state where he didn't want to live anymore. So we have to be very careful when we speak about our spirituality. There's a saying that you cannot be so heavenly high that you're no earthly good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're supposed to be humans as well as spiritual beings. So I think oftentimes people worry about their mental health so much that it affects their spirituality. And sometimes people focus so much on the spirituality that they negate the human aspect to this. Let me throw this in real quick. I remember there was a woman, and when we speak about mental health, we want to make sure that we incorporate domestic violence as being a form of mental health. And she and her husband were going through a lot because he was constantly abusing her. And when they would go to the pastor, they would tell the pastor, you know, this is what's happening. And pastor, because he was lacking in the knowledge of mental health, lacking in the knowledge of counseling, they tend to say sometimes that not all preachers are pastors, and not all pastors are preachers. And everything he would tell this young lady, he was like, stay in the relationship and God will bring you through, and pray, he will deliver you. God, and every night she would just get beat. And at one point she went to the pastor, what should I do? What should I do? No, stay and pray. A week later, the husband's anger and abuse escalated where he stabbed her in the chest, and she died. So when someone is being told that, how do you tell them, well, was this Jesus? Was this God? Was this, you know, did God want that? You know, but the reality is that God expects you to be not only spiritual, but also be wise and human. You know, maybe I don't need to be in that relationship at that time. Maybe we need some time apart. Maybe we need some major counseling. Maybe he needs to spend some time alone in a cell, you know, to rethink his ways and his actions or her actions. So when we talk about mental health and we talk about spirituality, we really have to be mindful, not only being a pastor, but also a counselor. Take some type of certification that will give you some type of introduction to mental health and how the brain functions, and how emotionally. Sometimes, you know, some pastors preach very emotionally and not biblically. You know, they incorporate their frustrations out and they try to sugarcoat it with scripture. So we have to be very, very, and not that I appreciate negativity, but sometimes when it comes down to, in particular to COVID, not that I'm pleased about it, but COVID has allowed, especially within our African American or Black and Brown communities, to kind of unveil the need for mental health among us. Slowed us down, you know, slowed us down. We in the whole economic sphere, Josh, we live in a fast-paced society. And in this fast-paced society, particularly in Black and Brown communities, we have either long hour. You have individuals that are either working long hours or working two jobs. And still they're married and they have kids, but they were never home. So now that COVID comes in and they are staying at home, husband and wife really forgot who they were and who they engaged with. And that's where you got all this domestic violence that came in, frustration, arguing, sadness, depression, you know, loneliness. And yet still you got a house full of people. So we're grateful. We're grateful to some degree that this has caused us to stop and think and process, evaluate, and express ourselves.
Yeah. So thank you, Pastor. So let's talk about now the path to wellness, right?
Okay.
We know we have depression. We know we have PTSD. We know that we've all gone through the trauma of this situation. If I'm now coming to terms with this was stigmatized, I'm ready, I'm mentally in the right place, that I know I need help, I know I need support, where do I even begin?
first of all, I'm so glad that, like I said before, this conversation has become very popular and almost trendy as well when you have people like Taraji P. Henson and celebrities who are pushing it on. You begin with locating a therapist or counselor that's suitable for you. I know some people of color like to deal with counselors and therapists that are also people of color because they can relate. And there's also Christians who like to deal with Christian therapists. So I would say you start and begin by doing the research and finding what's appropriate for you. It's just like finding the right church for you or finding the right gym for you. You know, wherever you're going, make sure it's going to be suitable for you. And as the process goes on, you make sure it's still good. You know, you do your check-ins and your evaluations and make sure there's progress.
Shawn, same question for you. You know, say I'm a 20-something-year-old. I never been to get any type of counseling or mental health before, but now I'm at a place in my life, well, no matter what age actually, but I'm an adult and I'm at a place in my life where I understand that I have this need. Where do I even begin?
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a friend of mine. There are two websites, Therapy for Black Men and Therapy for Black Girls. So the web address is therapyforblackgirls.org and therapyforblackmen.org. But what I would stress is that when seeking for counseling or therapy, make sure that you are identifying someone who is qualified. I think while it's great that we are much more aware of mental health now, there is also a saturation in the market.
Oh, no.
Everyone's a therapist. And there are people who are qualified and there are people who are not. And just making sure that, yes, referrals always are a good idea. If you know someone who's been through therapy and you feel comfortable saying, hey, you know, who do you use?
I agree.
Get a referral, right? But when we're jumping on and we're jumping on to these little, you know, sites that we're just Googling and finding, you may not necessarily get quality care, quality people.
Speaking of qualifications, Shawn, I see that you have letters behind your name. I can't pronounce those letters. Are they? Do they stand for something, or are they?
Yeah. So the LCSW, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and the CMHIMP, that's a certified mental health integrative medicine practitioner.
And Maya.
Yeah, so I am a social worker like my brother Shawn here. I'm a licensed master social worker. I just graduated a couple of months ago and then got licensed right after because I'm not playing, and soon I'll get my C like you, Shawn.
Awesome. Is it a field that you guys would recommend more people of color go into?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Woo.
Yeah, I think, you know, unfortunately what happens is that we have a field that doesn't, the people who use the services look more like us, and the people who offer the services, there aren't enough of us.
Right.
So I encourage people to get into the field, especially men.
Yeah,
Because there's not enough men in the field either.
Yeah, because I would imagine that there's a level of being able to relate to or speaking to someone who can relate to your cultural, racial, economic experiences, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but Josh, if I can add that on also, it's not just finding somebody that you know either looks like you and is also certified or licensed, but then it's somebody that you actually can relate to, somebody that you're comfortable with, because oftentimes, you know, we've had clients that have come through our company that, you know, they went through a therapist that they felt that that individual was judging them as opposed to counseling them. And, you know, checking out that person's background, they were a former lawyer or a former judge, you know, so that individual. So that's very important. Here at our office, though I do a level of counseling, both on a spiritual and a level of clinical, but at the same time too, we have Our office is fully fledged. Our clinical supervisor oversees all of our clinicians, and we also have an MD that is also on staff too. And then sometimes a female may be comfortable more with another female therapist, and there are some males that are comfortable with female therapists. I myself have had a female therapist and a male therapist counsel me in the past, and I think that's one of the things that we kind of don't allude to, is the fact that therapists see therapists.
Yes.
So, Pastor Sony, tell us what are the specific services provided by your organization and what your intake process is. Do I just walk on off the street and sign up?
We do have an intake process, of course. With COVID, we have a partnership with an organization called Simple Practice, where we actually, when we're taking you in, you would go down to the Simple Practice, and they would actually send you an online intake form. So right before we see you, we would definitely know exactly what you're being seen for. Aside from that, we would, if somebody does want to walk in, I do observe the social distancing and all the requirements that our office does need to, but I like to kind of see people in person. If they're not comfortable with it, I completely understand, and we just go over to what they call telehealth now, and we could do the sessions here. We do take insurance, what they would call, I believe it's called in-network and out-of-network, when it comes down to insurance, because at the end of the day, oftentimes people can't pay for health insurance, or particularly in our community, they would prefer to buy a pair of Yeezys than pay for therapy. Or buy a new cell phone, or things that may not help, or would somewhat temporarily deal with their emotional or mental issue.
Okay, so we're coming to the close of our program. It's been wonderful having all of you committed professionals on this show. Some final words from each of you, starting with Maya.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I feel like I am an extended Haitian family member, and this topic particularly is really important to me. So I just want to say thank you for anyone who's looking for any networks with me. You can find me on Instagram, blackexcellence_LMSW, where I'm currently cultivating my own private practice, but I do have free group therapies on a casual level, and I offer just emotional support. I offer my email, my text, and things of that nature. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. Thank
you, Maya Bass. Shawn.
Okay, well, I definitely want to thank you all again for having me on. I'm not a Pierre. I see most of the, you are Pierres. I'm also not Haitian. I'm Jamaican, but the Caribbean diaspora. So I appreciate being here. Also, I just want to encourage everyone to embrace healing, right? Embrace healing behavior, and it's necessary. I am also the president of the Caribbean American Social Workers Association, so CASWA.org. That is a resource for you, as well as I do have a private practice that I will be launching this year, strengthbyhealing.org. So that website live soon. A holistic approach. Again, I think it's a combination of everything: spirituality, mental health, physical health, how you eat, what your space that you live in looks like. All those things contribute to your mental health. So let's make it a point to focus on it.
Thank you, Shawn. Be sure to come back and tell us about it when you launch the organization. And Pastor Sony, if you could, in a few seconds, give us your closing statement.
Man, thank you guys so much. It's truly an opportunity to be on this panel, especially with two wonderful, not to say that Josh ain't wonderful, but two wonderful people such as Shawn and Maya. I'm grateful and happy that we have people of color that are tending to the needs of our black and brown brothers and sisters. There was a time where we used to be afraid of social workers when they come to the house, but now we can embrace them. So thank you guys so much for your contribution.
Thank you, Pastor Sony. And on behalf of HJC TV, I would like to thank our guests and our audience for joining us for this conversation, confronting COVID and how COVID impacts you mentally. We bring these thought-provoking programs to our community in order to advocate for a better society through wholeness and a lifestyle of excellence. HAC Radio for our Creole-speaking audience will continue tomorrow at 6:45 p.m. on Radio Soleil. You can tune in from our website, which is hacglobal.org/join. Feel free to share this and other broadcasts with your friends, family, and neighbors. Till our next broadcast, I wish you health, success, and happiness. Thank you.